I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Durhane Wong-Rieger, who is our President and CEO of Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, or CORD. Durhane is greatly respected by all players at the table for access to treatment for rare disorders, from patients to pharmaceutical companies, patient organizations, and payers. She is an advocate, a mentor, and is one of the people in the world who can look back and know she made a positive change in the country that will benefit all affected by rare disorders. And she is my personal hero. So welcome everyone, and thank you, Durhane, for doing this for us.
Oh, no, thank you so very, very much. I need to be able to share. It says it's disabled. So can you enable the screen sharing so I can share screen? I think you just have to go on to the, you just have to enable it. Okay, I think,
You're good.
Is it enabled now? Yeah, now we've got it. Thank you very much. Let me just put my slides up. It's always something, right? We, no matter what, we always end it. Does that show up? You get the,
Yep, we've got it.
All right, so thank you very much. And now that we've gotten a little bit of the technical hiccups out of the way, just again, my huge thanks certainly to Susie and to Holly and the wonderful group at Cure SMA. She said I was her hero, but absolutely Cure SMA is one of the, if not at the moment, the most outstanding patient advocacy group that we have in Canada. In fact, the last time we gave out our award in terms of patient advocacy group excellence, it was without a doubt went to Cure SMA Canada. So we're delighted to be part of your family. We're delighted to always be able to take part in what you're doing. And as I talked about where we are now in terms of access to rare diseases, and certainly to the rare disease drug strategy, you will know that SMA has been not just a poster child for us, but has been, as I say, paving the way. So, you know, kudos to everybody in SMA, because what you're doing is you're doing it for all of us. So huge thanks. What I want to do in this is to, as we say, lessons for rare disease access for the SMA community in Canada. But quite frankly, it should really say from the SMA community in Canada, because again, the SMA community in Canada has been such an amazing, I think, trailblazer for us. And I don't think that we would be where we are today in terms of our overall rare disease strategy and our drug access without the contributions of the SMA community. Of course, you folks realize you're very lucky in terms of where you sit with the access to new therapies coming in, but you've made the most of it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, as we say, let me put it on screen share so that I've got it properly set up. There we go. So I want to talk about what are some of the opportunities and challenges for access to SMA treatment in Canada. Now, what I do want to say, and I'm sure you all know, and I've heard from parents and others, you know, as good as things are, there's still a lot of challenges. And I think, you know, every single day we realize that, you know, the fight is not even, you know, halfway won, right? There are so many barriers that so many people are still experiencing, but there's new opportunities that continue to come. And certainly that's important as well as we look forward. So until everybody, you know, certainly in the SMA community, but everybody with rare disease that has the potential to access a therapy can get it as soon as it's available, as soon as they need it. We do not feel that we've got a job done. So this is our goal for everybody. So what are we learning from SMA? And also what is it that we're learning, what we're putting together in an overall rare disease drug strategy that we hope that SMA will also be able to take advantage of. So let me talk, I'm going to give you a little bit about where we are now. So this is the Canadian rare disease drug landscape. Some of it will be really familiar to you, even from last year when I spoke to you in December, but also those of you who I know have been participating on some of the webinars that we've been doing. You will know that we hosted some 16 webinars last year to help us prepare for the rare disease drug strategy. So that led, you know, I would just say, just because we're among friends here, you know that the federal government in 2019 pledged $1 billion to set up the rare disease drug strategy. And of course, they had an election, and then they had to have a new health minister, and then the health minister had to get together with provincial health ministers. And last March, when we were just about ready to go, anyway, we became delayed. But we did have very recently released Health Canada's report on what we heard during the rare disease strategy consultations. And if you've not read that report, if you haven't had access to it, I really urge all of you to read it, because quite frankly, it was one of the best news that we had seen coming out of a government body. And it's something that we need to work with and follow up on. I'll tell you about our latest consultations with them. We are still, as we say, part of that landscape, though, are still battling with the Patent Medicines Prices Review Board. And again, I'm not going to try to give you the entire history of it, but for those of you who have been participating and looking more broadly at the Canadian drug landscape, you may be aware that the Price Control Board introduced new regulations and then new guidelines, which in one respect sounded great, that they were going to be able to really restrict the maximum price of drugs. On the other hand, what was going to do was actually try to make them so low that many drug companies were going to be really hesitant to come into Canada. And in fact, because they were going to be legally binding, were not only going to be delayed, but they might actually choose not to come. And we also have some worries that companies might actually start to pull some of their drugs because of some of these measures. So this is, in fact, on the one hand, it sounds like a very good thing, because we've got, the idea that, okay, we can have lower drug prices. I think from a patient community, we need to understand what can that mean in terms of our access. We also are, and you're really very much right in the eye of the storm right now, is that we still have two bodies in Canada that actually make the recommendations on whether or not there should be access to new therapies as they're coming in, and quite frankly, make the recommendations in terms of who should get access to that therapy, how much, they would recommend it be paid for. And so again, this is not my intention to go through the entire drug review process for those of you who, may be somewhat new to this, but just to recognize that the government, the regulatory body, will first approve the drug in terms of whether it can be, whether it's safe and effective. The Pricing Review Board says, okay, here's how much you, drug company, can charge for it, the maximum you can charge and recommended what you can charge. And then we've got another body, two bodies actually, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, and also the INES group, which does the similar thing for drugs in Quebec. And that is, who can get access to those drugs under what circumstances. So, but really what they want to do is they recommend how much should your public payer be paying for this drug. And if that sounds like it's just another barrier, it in fact can be. So this is a huge problem. And then just as we thought we might be through the thicket and out of the woods there, we enter another barrier. And this is an interesting body. And of course, if you're tired of all these acronyms, it's understandable. The Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, which is really the body that negotiates with the public payers how much they're going to pay. So you get it approved, you get one agency that says, here's the most you can charge for it or recommended charge. You get another agency that says, here's who can get access to it. And hey, by the way, we're going to give you another recommendation on how much you can charge for it. And then we get to the purchasing negotiator who negotiates on behalf of all the plans, and they say, we're going to sit down at the table with you. We've got all these recommendations. We're going to tell you how much we're really willing to pay. And as you can imagine, with each step, the payer community is saying, we want to pay less and less. We want to make sure that you give it to us for as low a price as possible, which sounds great. The challenge, of course, is that you get to a point where the drug agency, the drug company is going to say, we can't do that. We cannot really provide it at that price, or we're going to be negotiating. And as some of you will know, some of the drugs sit in that Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance for many years before they get negotiated. And right now, you've got one drug that's been stuck there for a while, your Zolgensma. You've got another drug that's just been recommended, and it will be starting those negotiations, and it could be stuck for a while. So we'll talk a little bit about, kind of where we are now and how we're hoping that some of this can change with a new rare disease drug strategy. So as I say, good news, we have new drugs. Bad news is that step up to the table, because it's going to be a battle for you to get it into, your kids' bodies here. So here's the context and opportunities. We do have the commitment, as I said, in the 2019 budget that said up to $1 billion the federal government was going to invest for us to set up a new rare disease drug strategy. And that is very, very good news. Nobody has that. Nobody actually has a dedicated body in the world that actually says, okay, our job is to make rare disease drugs available. So it's a great opportunity. And it really is the product of a huge amount of advocacy that we've been doing, including obviously the SMA community. We have pictures of you guys marching with us, appearing with us before hearings. I know Susie has appeared with us a number of times in terms of very important hearings. We have made this happen. But now, of course, we've got to get them to actually implement it. So this is our big challenge, and this is what we've been working on. The promise is there, and the promise is not just the money. The promise is a way of being able to make those drugs available. I just talked to you about all the agencies that are involved. We want to shortcut that. We want to be able to work, around those agencies, through those agencies, whatever the right word is, to have a strategy that does not get bogged down every single step of the way. So we've been very pleased that over and over, they've been really reinforcing that this money is available, including in this very last budget from the Liberals right before they rose this past year. So we are very pleased the monies are there. We've been meeting with the Progressive Conservatives, and they've assured us that if they are in power, the $500 million a year. So it's not just $1 billion to set it up, $500 million a year to sustain it. That if they're in power, that they will continue to support this for us. And so we're very excited about the fact that we have commitment to move forward on this. The next step, of course, is, as we always say, the devil's in the details. What does it look like? And when is it going to happen? So we'll talk a bit more about that. But again, honest to God, we need SMA to be part of it. You guys are really leading the way for us. And as you well know, there's no such thing as saying, okay, we're done. We're job over, we can go home. So what we have recommended is, and I won't go into deep detail on this, but what do we want in terms of this rare disease drug strategy? Well, we don't just want to have a fund that says, okay, we're going to fund drugs. Even though we sound like, $500 million a year, as you can imagine, with the cost of therapies, the number of new therapies, and the number of patients that are in need of therapies, $500 million a year will be gone like that. So we're not handing out $500 million a year, right? We need to be very smart in terms of how we're going to be investing this monies. And quite frankly, as you looked at the highly dysfunctional and time delayed access to therapies that that has happened in that I showed you before, what is that in fact, if we were to follow all those steps, it really wouldn't help us how much money we've got. So what we want to make sure that we're able to do is to come up with a different process that will allow us to move very rapidly through that process. So we have recommended to Health Canada a 12-step to a new framework. One is patient empowerment. Honest to God, this is why we're all here. This is why we're all committed. And honest to gosh, right? Nobody would be here unless the patients and the community have been there front and center, not just doing the advocacy, but doing the hard work, doing the heavy lifting, understanding the therapies, understanding the needs, proposing solutions, and actually contributing all along the way. You would not be kind of where you are in terms of even having the overall framework that's there now, if it had not been for the work that's been done by the community. And of course, SMA has been very fortunate. They've had some great partners, including, Muscular Dystrophy Canada. And I think a huge credit to the SMA community for being able to develop those partnerships and being able to work in partnership, because it takes all of us pulling together to make this happen. So patient empowerment is front and center. We need to make sure that patients are represented and have a voice in the decision-making at every single step. Without that, none of this works. And we've been very pleased so far in terms of, I think, the ability to be listened to. We need to have a rare drug agency. This is an entity that will pull together all the pieces. So all those parts that you saw with the regulator and with the pricing and with the review of who gets access to it, all of that should be under one umbrella that is in fact devoted to rare diseases. The government has proposed a Canadian drug agency, which would be an umbrella for all drugs. And we feel that there needs to be one, though, that's specific to the rare disease drug. And it doesn't mean that we want a building. It doesn't mean that we need to have an office I mean, but what we need to do is to have the consolidation, coordination, so that every piece knows what it's doing and that there is, in fact, accountability, that we know who we can go to, and we quite frankly know who we need to be partnering with in order to make this happen. So that's really an important aspect of it. We need to have incentives for research and development. This is something that you folks have known well, and certainly, the SMA, the muscular dystrophy communities, have been front and center in terms of funding research and supporting research. This is, key in terms of our being able to be not just a net purchaser of drugs, but a player in the system, making a contribution into the system. And quite frankly, there are other things other than just drug research that needs to be invested in: patient registries, patient monitoring, the collection of ongoing data, to determine what is working and what's not. Quality of life information, that is hugely important. There's been some very important studies that have been done to look at the impact of SMA in terms of patients and families. The economic burden has been done. There's a beautiful study, if you haven't seen it, that's just come out of very good colleagues of ours in Malaysia. And, Edmund Lim and his group have just, produced a wonderful document in terms of the impact of SMA in terms of families in Malaysia. And they actually have a webcast that will be taking place. I think it kind of starts like at 10:30 tonight. I'm not sure exactly which day it was. I promised them I would be on, but maybe not stay on for the entire thing. It's like a 2 or 3 hour webcast, but it's gorgeous. And if, it's really worth reading because it documents in deep detail the challenges of SMA on patients and families. Some of it, of course, is unique to the challenges of their environment, but I'm sure much of it you would resonate with, and it fits well with many of the other works that have been coming out of the Canadian and other communities. So I think the other thing to recognize, of course, is research and development is really in an international context. And that's the beauty, I think, in terms of the work that's taking place in the neuromuscular disease community, is that it's working right across, not across just across Canada, but across the globe. And that actually makes a huge impact because it also brings to the table real evidence, real research. So when the question is, why are we doing this? Why are we paying for this? Part of it is, here's what happens when you don't. Here's the impact in terms of families, and here's what it costs, not just families, but here's what it also costs the health system. Here's what it costs society if we're not investing to our fullest. So the economic studies have been in Canada, the impact studies that have been done, elsewhere, I think are hugely important, and Canada needs to continue to be and actually lead the way in much of that. And I will say, quite frankly, to the SMA community, you're in a position to actually do much more of that research, especially as we bring some of these therapies in with monitoring. So this is really very important. So yes, investing in the research to develop drugs and the manufacturing of them, but beyond that, investing in the research on the communities. This is the thing that I think everybody wants. And even though it's number 4 on our list, it's kind of number 1 in everybody's mind. How do we get faster access to treatments? I mean, you folks know already the long road to getting a drug into therapy, sometimes years in terms of research and development. And then, of course, it sits around and it sits around. I mean, as you know right now, it took years to get Spinraza, not only well, it didn't take years to get it approved because actually Health Canada has been doing a good job in terms of getting the regulatory approvals much quicker, but in fact, years to even get it to the point where it was provisionally available from a reimbursement basis and still not fully reimbursed right across the country. So how do we make that happen? How do we make it equitable? But how do we make it faster? And as you know, gene therapy, Zolgensma, I think it breaks everybody's hearts. There are families who are waiting. There are families who should get access right away. And if you're lucky, you get diagnosed, you get access, and, you can look forward to a really, really, future, bright future in terms of quality life capabilities. On the other hand, there's so many children that are still being delayed. There's so many older children that are not getting access. There's so many adults that are not getting access. So timely access, appropriate access, this has got to be part of it. Huge recommendation, of course, is to make sure that, we are part of those discussions and helping to set it up. And I'll talk a little bit about what's happening with Health Canada now. So address the regulatory barriers. And again, our biggest concern right now is these patent medicines prices. Real world guidelines, they're creating huge challenges in terms of what is an acceptable price. And we've had some really interesting, legal cases on this. And I think we're much more optimistic than we were, let's say, at the beginning of the year. We've got to improve the regulatory approval process. I will say is that Health Canada, we think, is really doing a good job in terms of being able to get these drugs approved, not only to approve them quickly, but also looking at, clinical trials that are not your traditional randomized clinical trials and are able to make very good recommendation. Risk plan, you're getting an update on it later, but, they gave a blanket approval for any, body over 2 months of age with the right kind of genomic sequencing and deletion. So, genetic deletion. So, it's not Health Canada that's delaying it, but it doesn't mean that we're done with them. There are more drugs coming. There are more therapies coming. There are combination therapies that will be coming. Right now, we do not have approval for combination therapies, and this is a challenge. As you know, if a therapy does not work successfully, can you actually transition to another therapy? It is not automatic at this point. So this is a huge challenge in looking forward. So, we need to make sure the regulators are staying up to date and are able to move in a timely fashion with regard to their approvals. And we're still pushing for Health Canada to do much more in harmonization with the US and the EMA. Can you not work together? And can you not then have a similar application process so companies can apply to all of the regulatory agencies simultaneously? We know that Canada works with Switzerland, it works with the UK, it works with Australia, and they're doing joint reviews. They're not necessarily applying them in the rare diseases in the way we think they can. Not every country, it's the same packet of data. Can we not get a joint regulatory approval so that it would be faster and it would also be consistent? So these are things we need to continue to work on. Facilitate the Health Canada and the HTA reviews. So right now there's the opportunity, I think if you know already, when I talk about CATA, the 9S, usually it's sequential, get the regulatory approval, then get the recommendations in terms of how it would be actually used and the recommendations for pricing. We can do those together. We don't have to do them sequentially. That's already in works as a process, but quite frankly, it isn't quite as fast as it should be. And we need to make sure that they're all looking at the same data in the same way. We're still having, and you will see it in their reviews that are still coming out, the very latest one on Risdiplam. Health Canada says, yes, we can approve for anybody over 2 months. We get, the HTA agency says, we don't quite agree with that. We're going to go back to the clinical trials. I'm going to give a much narrower interpretation to it. No, we've already got the approval in terms of how the drug can be used safely and effectively. Why then would you want to go back and redo that? And I think this is a big challenge, and it just takes time, but it also ends up with recommendations for reimbursement that are not in keeping with what the regulator has approved, and certainly not what the intentions are in terms of the use in the community by clinicians or others. Big things are supporting the real world evidence. As we know, we're providing drugs, and you folks have been, certainly on the front lines of that. Drugs with very different kinds of clinical trials, drugs that are sometimes extended beyond the clinical trial community to make sure that they're going to be more broadly available. And guess what? Sometimes you have to take a chance in terms of making them available to people for whom you have limited data coming out of clinical trials. But that doesn't mean that you just make them available, right? It's like we're watching the vaccines. We need to make them available. We need to keep monitoring them. And then we need to make sure that as they're being made available, we're able to update our guidelines on the usage on that real world evidence. But it's not easy. We do not actually collect very good real world evidence. We talk about it, and everybody says, okay, yeah, patient data, we should collect that. We should be able to analyze that. We do not have automatic mechanisms for it. You're lucky in the SMA community because there's been a lot of good clinical work, obviously with the support of the patient organizations and with the clinicians to actually put together the patient registries. But it is still not a a standardized process in terms of what's being collected, how it's going to be analyzed, et cetera. So again, we're looking actually at SMA, in terms of saying, how do we actually make sure that we collect that? I mean, you have the beauty of having 3 therapies potentially available, can we collect real world evidence to really determine who should get access to it and when? I think those are the kinds of things that we can only learn if we're actually collecting that information in real time. But beyond that, what are the other kinds of impacts in terms of quality of life, in terms of functionality, in terms of people's ability to continue to go to school, to work, to carry out what their other activities are? So those are things that are not automatically collected, but can be powerful when it comes back to saying, how well does this drug work? Should we continue to make it available? And to whom should we make it available? And even how much should we be paying for it? So these are really important. This has got to be, and again, the capacity to do it in the SMA community is there, and we're hoping that we can work, with your teams, and that we will be able to put together these places. There's a forum coming up very shortly, hosted by Canada and Health Canada and by CORD, quite frankly, on real world evidence in rare diseases. What should that look like? There's a forum that's part of that forum is what kind of platforms. Do you know that one of the big challenges we have in collecting real world evidence is that we cannot actually share patient data across provinces? That you cannot, if you're living in Alberta, it's not easy to make sure that your data is also going to be, able to be shared with people in Ontario so that we can have a bigger understanding in terms of how these therapies are working. We have privacy laws, which are very important, but when the privacy laws become barriers, then it's time to really think about, what do we have? We also don't have really good ways of analyzing these data. We know how to analyze clinical trial data. We're not real sure how to analyze real world data. What counts and what doesn't count? What indicates that something's effective or not? These are the kinds of things that have to be done, with the clinical experts, with now increasingly digital experts. How do we collect that information? How do we download it? How do we use it? So this is a real great opportunity. And then enhancing centers of expertise. And again, these are not necessarily in orders of importance. Luckily, in the neuromuscular, community, you have amazing centers that have been put together, and they run the gamut from diagnosis, clinical trials, all the way through to, monitoring of patients, in the clinical setting. But we need to do that, and we need to link all of these centers across different diseases together into a network. So we'll talk a little bit about a proposal we have for a collaborative Canadian network for rare diseases, which we hope will parallel or be part and parcel of a rare disease drugs agency, an agency written with a small a, not a big A. So this is kind of what we're talking about. Oh, I think I did my slides in backwards order. Sorry about that. Yeah, apologize. Pathways for special cases. So yeah, I guess I did 10, 11, 12. This is 7, 8, 9. They're important as well. We do not have, and you folks will know that, our urgent access programs. Our SAP programs work up to a certain point. We do not have what we call early access programs. So SAP works until the drug gets approved by Health Canada. Early access programs are available in most other countries. They're not available in Canada. And that is, the drug is approved, patients are waiting. They cannot afford to wait until it's gone through all of the other steps that we talked about. What's the process for making them available to patients immediately? And that means always in front of the negotiated price. We can catch up with the pricing later. We need to make them available to patients immediately. We need to have agreements with companies that say, how are we going to risk share the payment for these drugs? Because these patients cannot wait. A child who's 2 months old is not going to be that same child 2 years and 2 months later by the time you get prices negotiated, right? You guys know that. A young adult who is 16 is not going to be the same young adult when you negotiate that price at 18. So this is what we need to do. We need to make sure that we have an early access program as part of any kind of rare disease drug program. Multiple funding options. This is, I think, really challenging because can we and should we be able to have different ways of funding these drugs, especially when we think about gene therapies, right? I mean, if we have just one drug budget and we say, okay, we'll pay for everything out of that one drug budget, if we have a half a dozen gene therapies, it could suck up a lot of a drug budget. So, and then, and that's the challenge back. Well, it's not the case of, do I fund 20 patients on an ongoing basis? Do I fund one child with a gene therapy? The challenge is, how do we set up different financing options? And we need to have a separate financial options for these long-term durable therapies, these one-time very high-price therapies, or even ongoing high-price therapies. We need to figure it out. We also have not figured out how we actually blend our public and private drug programs. So again, a lot of times what happens is that if you have private insurance, you get access. Sometimes the private insurance gives up and says no. And then it goes into, the patient goes into the public system. This is absolutely, dysfunctional in terms of both the systems and obviously in terms of the patients. We need to have an agreement that if a child comes or an adult comes and needs to have access to rare disease drugs, there's one program, one application, one funding bucket. Now, who contributes to it is a different story. Could be the feds, could be the provinces, could be the private drug plans, but the patient should not have to wander from drug plan to drug plan trying to get access. This is not the way to make it work. So we need to create a single one-stop funding access for the patients and families, but the financing of it needs to come out of multiple channels, not just a single drug budget. Then leverage managed access programs. So we talked about this already. And again, that drugs coming in, Spinraza was a great case of it. We don't have all the evidence for the older children. We don't have all the evidence for children that are over, a certain age. We need to make sure that as these drugs are coming in, we're able to make them available. Right now, we have the case for you folks, of course, at risk plan. We have data up to age 25. What about, older adults? Can we make them available? Clinical trials are going on, but can we wait? Should we wait another 2 years, 4 years for those? No, we could put patients on a program. We can monitor how well they're responding. And if they're responding the way that they should be, then we can keep them on the therapy. If they're not, then we need to find something else. I mean, we do not need to be stuck there. So that's the whole idea of an outcomes-based managed access program. Enough data to say it's safe. Now let's figure out who can be made available, but let's not make everybody wait until we've done more clinical trials. So sorry, these are slightly out of order. We'll fix them up better. So as I was saying, the advances in what's happening in SMA are really, to me, when we talk about rare disease drug strategy, we're saying a whole lot more than just drugs. We obviously are talking about the need to have an overall system. And we introduced a system back in 2015. And that system is exactly the pathway in which SMA is helping us to actually create an ideal roadmap. Newborn screening and diagnosis, expert centers with patient registries, and outcomes-based assessment and therapy options, and then real-world evidence. Hey, guess what? It's happening. But guess what? It's happening by hit and miss. It's happening without a whole lot of centralization. It's happening, in a very delayed fashion. We need to be able to learn from this and to use this as a case example to say, what did we learn? How is it working? How well is it working? And what do we need to do then to replicate this in terms of other communities, other therapies are coming in? We have other therapies that are actually following some of the same pathway, but nobody, I think, is quite as clear in terms of how it's working and how it could work as the SMA community. And to some of the reason why. Part of it's the newborn screening and diagnosis. Hey, you've got now a really, really good test that could be being administered in a pilot way. How do we make sure we take best advantage of that? You do have expert centers and they're well linked together. And we do have patient registries. How do we really make them functional so that patients are enrolled, that we're collecting all the right information, and that information helps us to decide, what are the outcomes that we need to be capturing in order, and not just for infants, right, but for children and for adolescents and for young adults, and not just in terms of biomarkers, but also in terms of functionality. What do we need to capture in order to determine how well it's working and to make a case for it? So it's that real world evidence. So this is an important roadmap that you're on right now, that you're creating for us. We need to capture it. We need to make sure that we continue to not advance it, but also to make sure that we learn from it. So this is what you've got, and oh my gosh, kudos to the SMA and muscular dystrophy and neuromuscular disease community, because you're doing this for all of us. Newborn screening, great pilot that was done in Ontario. Now it's available in Ontario. Pilot set up now in Alberta, Quebec, and Manitoba. Hey, let's hope that as those pilots are actually rolling out and they're demonstrating their value, that they get not only funded, but they get funded everywhere. This is essential. And, really other diseases are looking at this and saying, okay, how do we do this? The challenge is a little bit in terms of, how do we get them accepted? We're not going to expect that every single newborn test is going to have the capacity that you've been able to have in terms of putting together pilots in order to bring in the pilot funding for it. So we need to be able to use it to say, okay, we've demonstrated here. Now we've got other diseases that have that opportunity to bring in a newborn screening and to be able to implement it. We do not need to do more pilots. We do not need to look for other fundings, because what we have shown, and certainly what the initial studies have shown, and even the research coming out of the States, right, is that it is cost effective. The ability to be able to diagnose a child and to be able to get that child into the right therapy is definitely cost effective when you look at the lifetime impact. Neuromuscular disease network, you've got a disease registry, a pediatric network. Hey, this is way ahead of the game in terms of many other conditions. I mean, yes, we have cystic fibrosis, yes, we have ALS, yes, we have other diseases, but so many of the smaller diseases do not, and they're not networked in the same way, even the not so smaller diseases. And not to, call, name names out of school, but, even some of the ones that have been around for a lot longer, do not necessarily have the kind of connections that you've got in terms of having set up. And I know it's been done by the clinicians and by the researchers themselves and putting it together. We need to standardize this more. The other thing we need to do is we need to fund it. Many of these, as you know, are doing it off of funds that you contribute, that you raise. Many of them are doing it with no extra funding on the side of their desk while they're trying to see patients at nighttime when they're trying to also be able to, run a research project. We need to make sure that our, centers of excellence, our network centers, are actually funded and actually have specific, responsibilities and personnel into them. And again, when we say $500 million, what's it going for? It's going for this. It's going for newborn screening. It's going for support for, centers of excellence to ensure that we can make them, as effective as possible. The patient support community, obviously, this has been huge. Without that line, none of this would happen. So you folks know that you're front and center in all of this, not only in just raising your voices and bringing your stories together, but actually being the experts there and being at the table and continue to do exactly what, Susie, you guys are doing with the Cure SMA Community Canada. I looked at the rest of your agenda and it's like, oh my gosh, of course, making sure that you get that information out there, but it's coming from the patient community, which means that patients are being informed and educated along the way, and they're able to contribute effectively, as well as, certainly bringing the education and knowledge to all the other stakeholders. Hey, this is a big deal. So, we don't want to, we cannot minimize it. And of course, Muscular Dystrophy Canada has been doing this all along for so many years with all of the neuromuscular diseases. So I think the combination in terms of the patient support community working together has been absolutely powerful. And of course, we're always there to help you in whatever way we can to actually provide the kind of support, educational, and to cheer you on, but also, as we're doing right now, to borrow your expertise and to lend it to what we're trying to do for the whole community. Approved therapies. I mean, not enough can be said in terms of what it's meant, obviously, in terms of having first Spinraza, Zolgensma, Evrysdi, and as you know, you're not out of the woods on this one yet. We still haven't gotten an agreement on Zolgensma and being able to make it timely available from a public funding point of view, and even from a timing point of view. This is a continuing challenge. Patients that are a bit older, clinical trials going on. Yes, of course we can do that, but can we not find a way of making sure we get all those children in there that could in fact be, we know that after the next set of clinical trials, we're going to be able to treat some of these children with gene therapy, even if they're, older than the 2 months, the 6 months, the 12 months. But, we have children that are waiting now. I cannot say enough of how disappointed we are with the Canada's recommendations that are looking to be coming forth. We really, and I don't want to tell too much out of school. I don't know where those recommendations are right now in terms of public announcement, but this is our community. You guys all know that. We need to make sure that the recommendations for reimbursement are really going all the way back to what has been seen as safe and effective. What are the ways that we can make this broadly available based on not just the current data, but the data that we're going to be able to collect going forward. We do not have to have 100% data over a long period of time in order for us to be able to say clinically, and certainly from a patient point of view, that we should be making these therapies available. How do we make that happen? And again, as I said, as much roads as we have advanced here, we're still really stuck by this old system. And this to me is, the examples of the roadblocks that we're still having, with amazing therapies. And good gosh, we can't get them to our Canadian patients. And of course, the research partnership. So these are the pillars of the SMA program. These are the pillars that should be, the heart of and if we look at what we have kind of outlined for a rare disease strategy, you'll see that this is exactly what we've been talking about. Early detection and prevention when possible, timely, equitable, informed care, community support, access to therapies, and promoting research. You guys are living it. You're helping us provide a real template of providing a living example of what it is that we're trying to do right across the whole rare disease community. So kudos to all of you for really, really continuing to fight that fight and to continue to make this happen in as effectively as you are. I mean, there could not be a better example of what a rare disease strategy is all about and how it should work than what you're doing right now. So, we're all looking at you, and we're also thrilled in terms of what you've been able to do. I'm just going to very quickly go over this because we don't have a huge amount of time left. This is our vision going forward. And these are the things we're going to be doing as we're implementing, I say, not just the drug strategy. We are part of a global collaborative network for rare diseases. And what we want to do is set up a Canadian network for rare diseases, quite frankly, a rare disease network in Canada with a virtual, connection between all of the specific centers of excellence. And that this would also be our national hub in partnership with a international hub that's being put together, under the auspices of the World Health Organization and Rare Diseases International. This is a hugely exciting proposition. We'll be hosting some initial workshops and forums to talk about it and to see who we can bring in. And certainly we would look to the Neuromuscular Disease Network as one of those I think foundational parts of it. Patient value access for rare disease treatments. This is something that's very important for us, is really understanding where and how should drugs be made available, and that do we have, as we talked about, a pathway that we can go from clinical trials to regulatory approvals to early access, even before we have full negotiated access. We've got to be able to have that with an eye towards real world evidence. We need a platform for it. We need an actual standardization in terms of how this can be done. So this is another working group. These are all working groups that we're hoping to be, implementing this fall. Registries and real world evidence, we just talked about it. There's a work forum that's coming up shortly on it. We're going to be moving forward on that. What does this need to look like? We're very pleased that, groups like Canada and like Health Canada are looking at CORD as being a partner in terms of being able to set that up. More and more, it will be important. The clinical data will be there to start it off, but the real world data will absolutely be key in terms of making sure that those therapies are not only available, but they're going to be available much more timely. So we're seeing a big shift in terms of how, drugs are being developed and also made available, moving from the labs, moving from clinical trials into the real world. And again, as we've all experienced in living with COVID, I mean, the challenges we've had with these, vaccines is that people say, oh my gosh, does anybody know what they're doing? Every time we turn around, they're coming up with different recommendations, and how come we can't understand it? And how come you're saying one day mask and the next day not? How come you're saying 2 shots and then 3 shots? It's because we're living in a real world evidence world. And this is what patients and the public hopefully will be able to get used to. Because the other alternative is the old way, and that is we spend 2 to 5 years, we spend 12 years doing the research and doing the development and doing the clinical trials with small populations, under a laboratory kind of conditions, and then we make them available, or we say, okay, we open up the laboratory to the real world. But that means that people have got to not only participate, they've got to understand. We're doing this, and we're going to be adjusting as we go forward in real time. We're going to be doing this, and we're going to ask you to actually contribute. No, you can't just get the therapy and walk away. Not that you would, you know what I mean? You have to be involved. You have to continue to contribute. And the clinicians are going to have to take an even bigger role than the researchers did in terms of making sure these are available. This is so important. It's a totally different way of doing business. And it's something that is central to these new therapies that are coming out. So, get ready for it. We're hoping to get ready for it. You guys are already there and you're helping us to forge that pathway. Value-based pricing. We all know that, this whole rare disease drug strategy, originally Health Canada and the government called it, high-priced drugs for rare diseases or the expensive drugs for rare diseases. And we graded against this for a long time. And guess what? In the last proposal that we put forth, what we heard from Health Canada, from the federal government, was called a rare disease drug strategy. And we said, thank you. You finally understood. It isn't just the high prices. And it isn't the high prices we should be focused on. It's how do we absolutely make these drugs available? What are the other barriers in terms of access? And there's a lot of other drugs that are actually low price drugs that are not getting to people. So I think this is what we'll have. Does not, however, solve the problem. What should be paid for these drugs? How much are they really worth? And we think it's not based on, there's some simplistic notion and we can look at research and development. That's not it. There's not, simplistic notion of how much profit is the company making. That's not it. It really comes back to what's the value to the patients, to the community? What is the offset in terms of the health system? Where are we looking at in terms of the value that we can derive from it, not the basis of how much is it costing and how much money? And we go back to saying, we need to make sure that in Canada, we're not going to try to price these so low that companies don't want to come or that we can't get, the investment in the research and development that we need. It's a balance. But it also means that we have got to come into this as partners. We've got to come back to trusting each other, as opposed to, I think, where we are now, where there seems to be a huge amount of distrust within the system. But hey, I think we're doing a better job in rare diseases than elsewhere. So we need a realistic assessment. We can't do it just in Canada alone. We need international agreement in terms of how to set appropriate drug pricing and how to manage this going forward. But we know that it takes money to develop these therapies. We got to continue to invest in them. And Canada is not going to be that pariah that sits out there and says, hey, we were only going to pay, the lowest price, because at the end of the day, then we're going to be the least accessible in terms of getting these therapies. I won't put this up. I was going to show you kind of what we're planning to do and how we're going to do it. This is our sort of a little bit of a times of a I don't know, it's not, doesn't even have times in it. So it's just for me, a little bit of a roadmap on how we want to do it. Just kind of repeats in a little bit more detail how we hope each one of these working groups might actually help us in terms of coming to the Army. It's an open opportunity for you to also participate with us. This is not meant to be an expert only working group from the point of view of, other expertise. I'm almost out of time. I don't want to do too much. I just want to urge everybody to get involved though in the election. Hey, I'm not a political junkie. I don't really care that much about politics, but hey, guess what? If we aren't there and we aren't showing up and we aren't saying, don't forget the rare diseases, even though there's been a commitment to the funding, there needs to be a whole lot more. We're going to be putting out from CORD what we call a political toolkit, an election toolkit very shortly. And it will give you resources that you can use to go and find who your candidates are, to be able to figure out how you can connect with your candidates easier than ever now that we're all online, and to be able to put the proposition for rare diseases right in front of them to make sure that they understand and they're continuing to commit to rare diseases, regardless of what party they're in. And I think this is something that we're really, looking at. We did a session a couple of weeks ago that really just looked at the different parties. Each and every one of these parties has a reason to support rare diseases. It is up to you to actually put a face to that and be in front of that. So we're actually urging you to get active, to make sure that they not only understand rare diseases, but they have a face to rare diseases, because that's what they'll remember. They'll remember the face, they'll remember the person, they'll remember the family, and that's what will actually drive this, right? So we know that. And how many times have we seen it? These are our esteemed leaders that are going to be there. Each one of them has something around rare diseases, or not rare diseases, around pharmacare. And we're hearing that healthcare actually is going to be, once again, one of the top issues, not just for COVID. We need to make sure that healthcare is there as an important issue, and not just because, we need to figure out how to get out of the pandemic. So this is what we're trying to work with them. And we've seen, certainly what some of the other major parties have done. And there certainly, as we say, has been a commitment in terms of the two, national parties or leading national parties in terms of support. This is something that if you want to look at later, some other people are doing it better than me. I just put that in there to let you know that there are a lot of other competing issues. So we need to make sure that we're visible, not because we don't care about the other issues, but if we're not there with our issues, it will not count. And this is what we've talked about in terms of these are the issues that we want to make sure that you put in front of them. You know, we've got the 12 points. We'll reinforce that in our toolkit. We'll talk about the 5 points of the rare disease strategy. If you have any questions about what that is, just think back to what you're doing in SMA. That is exactly what we're all about. So how do we make sure that that becomes institutionalized, funded, and actually living for all the rare diseases? I won't finish up anymore on the PMPRB. We had very good conversations on the What We Heard report. We're very, very, hopeful that this will happen. We heard at our last meeting with Health Canada in following up on the What We Heard report, they said they're committed to bringing this in the beginning of the next fiscal year, April 2022. We're going to hold them to it. So we need to work hard then to make sure that we have this drug strategy that's going to be in place by next spring, regardless of who is in power. And that's it. Thank you very much.
That was so informative. Thank you so much, Durhane. I think, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of the patients joining in on these initiatives that CORD or Cure SMA Canada or MDC is holding, because truly this is how we are moving the mark. We hold these initiatives, whether it's surveys or movement to speak to government or, initiatives of, walking in front of the buildings and having them hear us and making a voice. We need the patients to be able to support those initiatives and not just count on us to be out there. We need you out there with us. Does anybody have any questions for Durhane? Just unmute yourself and go right ahead and ask.
Very nice presentation, Durhane, very informative. Yeah, we have a long battle ahead of us, but it's by having some people like you that are fighting for all the rare diseases that we're going to get through this. But thank you very much again. Very good presentation.
Oh, well, that's very good. But as Susie says, and as all of you know, it ain't me, right? It's all of us there. And, we have created such a presence. So thank you very much for your ongoing contributions.
Anybody else have a question? Yeah, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, but no question, just to thanks, Yannick, to say thank you to Durhane for your big job.
Well, hey, you know what? Quebec, though, is so exciting for us because we are seeing, we didn't go into the long detail, and you hear more in terms of the recommendations, from INES with regard to, risk plan. But I think Quebec can be a real, and INES as well, can be a real leader for us in terms of how we think this rare drug strategy will work out. And, we're always very hesitant, right? You put out anything national and you don't know how Quebec is going to join in. But I think Quebec is going to be an amazing front runner for us in terms of how this ought to look and the commitment they've made in terms of providing access. So whatever you guys are doing in Quebec in terms of making it happen, do more.
Yes, just keep the pressure.
Exactly.
But I definitely think the work is slower by the government because they want to keep the power on the health. So I'm disappointed about the way the province don't collaborate with the federal government. I think we need to be more standard. We saw the pressure they put for health for the how we say les personnes âgées, older people for have a standard care. You talk about Quebec, but we see with the pandemic for the CHSLD where the old people stay, we're not better than anywhere. I think working with all the province together have some standard, universal standard, it will be definitely good for every patient in Canada. So just we have from the province to put a productive pressure on the provincial government to say, don't be afraid to collaborate with the federal authority. I think we
That's
could
right.
do more. We between the two palliative of government.
That's right. I mean, patients are not federal or provincial, right? We are just patients. The other thing that's very important, and I'll bring it up, is that we're starting to collaborate more with other diseases. The Coalition for Cancer, Priority in Cancer, is huge in Quebec, and we have now kind of been talking to them. We need to think about, right? Important message going out is we cannot wait until the pandemic's over before we look at other diseases, because the pandemic's not going to be over. Guess what? We're going to be living with this. So we cannot ask cancer to wait. We cannot ask cardiovascular to wait. We cannot ask diabetes to wait. We cannot ask rare diseases to wait. We need the government to be able to figure out how we're going to be able to take care of everybody, because they will only get worse. And they will only be, not only costing more, but in, more of a, a burden, right? If we're not taking care of them. The same as you say, the issue of seniors is not separate from the issue of the pandemic. The same as the issue of rare diseases is not separate from the issue of the pandemic. If we don't take care of both of them at the same time, we will have worse problems. So don't wait for the pandemic to be over. It ain't going to be over.
All right, thank you so much, Durhane. I'm sorry, but with
Yeah.
that, we've got another meeting starting in 10 minutes. And, just thank you so much for an amazing opening presentation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks
you. Bye,
again.
everyone.